Have you ever thought whether you might be a prophet? No, you say, me, really? No chance. Well, why not? Well, to start with, prophets are old, and they're men, and they seem remote, far off, up on a mountain. They're special, set apart by God, messengers of God. That can't be me. This is the classic view that the prophets herald the vision of what is to come, and then they become the teacher, instructing people as to what to do to end suffering and return the world to a better place. They can also be mystics who describe the future as inspired by God and then guide people to find it within themselves. My proposition to you this morning is that we can be, and perhaps are, all of us, prophets. To explore the question, we need to actually understand what is a prophet. Let's contemplate that question looking at both of our readings today. First, the story of Samuel. To set the context, the book of Samuel chronicles the history of the development of the nation of Israel. It tells of the rise of the great prophet Samuel, a prophet for all the people of this new nation. What follows is the development of kingship, with the help of Samuel bringing all people under King Saul and eventually King David. This is serious and important, vitally important to the very being of the developing of the state of Israel. So I find it all the more amazing that the reading today opens as if it were a slapstick comedy. Take a moment to conjure up your favorite comedian and then insert them into this picture. An old priest. Eli is asleep in the outer room of the most important temple, for it houses the ark of the Lord's covenant. A young boy, Samuel, is asleep in the room with the ark. They're not just asleep in the hay somewhere, they are asleep in the very heart of God's connection to his people, right beside the ark. Samuel hears, "Samuel, Samuel!" And Samuel calls out, "Here I am!" and races into the next room, wakes up the old priest Eli and says, "Here I am, for you called me." Eli responds, "I didn't call. Now get some sleep and stop waking up an old man," or, well, something like that. The Lord called out again, "Samuel!" And same thing. Samuel gets up and races into the next room and says to Eli, "Here I am, for you called me." Eli responds, no doubt grumpily, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." A third time, same thing. And when Samuel races into Eli's room, a light goes off in Eli's brain that this might be the Lord calling. So he tells Samuel to go lie down again. But if he hears his name again, he is to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." So you can guess what happens next. Lord calls, "Samuel, Samuel," and this time Samuel lies still and says, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And Samuel gets the message. In summary, God told him, "I am about to do something big in Israel. Really, really big. I am going to punish the chief priest, that fellow Eli who you've been hanging out with. What has been going on around him is a swamp of iniquity, and it's time to drain that swamp. His sons are blasphemous, and he did nothing to stop them. There'll be nothing that Eli can do to repair my anger, not even sacrifices. Perhaps this story reminds you of a noted American public figure. Eli insisted that Samuel tell him everything, which Samuel did even though it was bad news. As he grew up, Samuel developed the reputation of being a trustworthy prophet of the Lord, one who spoke truthfully. What do we learn about prophecy from this story? Well, prophets are human, with all the comedic foibles, uncertainties, and questions that come from being human. We often don't get the message the first time or the second, and we need to learn to listen. One of the most important lines is, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Prophecy is an interplay, an ongoing interplay of listening, of interpreting, of trying to figure out what to think, what to do. A prophet stands out as an individual with the patience to listen to God. Prophets hear hard truths, which are hard to listen to, harder to process, and even harder to tell others. Prophets have the resilience to be surprised, to respond to the unexpected, even if it overturns long-held beliefs. The lectionary places this story of Samuel becoming a prophet together with the reading from John. This reading, early on in the chronological story of Jesus, is just after his baptism. Jesus is in the process of calling his disciples. He's already called some of them, and he travels back to Galilee and finds a man named Philip and says to him, "Follow me." And Philip does, without question. But then Philip finds Nathanael, a natural-born skeptic, perhaps a natural-born lawyer. Philip says to him, "We found the guy who Moses spoke about, the guy the prophets wrote about." Not overly impressed, Nathanael responds, "Well, can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Now that got my attention because growing up in Hamilton, the phrase would have been, "Can anything good come out of Toronto?" Loyalties were key, starting with hating the Argos in competition with our beloved Tiger Cats, and extending to deeper contempt for the Leafs. For your hockey team, for a true Hamiltonian, had to be any other team than the Leafs. So it took me years coming to Toronto to shift loyalties from the Canadians to the Leafs. But I digress. To cut through the skepticism, Philip says, "Come and see," an invitation to decide for yourself. No need to follow what someone else says. You enter into relationship with Jesus and see what happens. Once he's talking to Jesus, skepticism is thrown aside and Nathanael goes all in, acknowledging that Jesus is the Son of God, the King of Israel, following a long line starting with David as crowned by the prophet Samuel. Here are disciples with two very different invitations and different responses, one immediate and one that needed persuasion, differing human reactions. The invitation to us is to come and experience the good news, come share the joy. This good news, it's embodied in each of us, in the welcome that we share with the other, the hospitality extended to the stranger, by our deeds, by our presence, by our words. And so Christian communities develop, the good news passed from one to another over the generations and through the ages. John makes this clear much later in the gospel when he writes about Jesus, the risen Christ, meeting with his disciples. Jesus describes his movement as a prophetic There was an article in the New York Times in November alongside a sketch of the late Matthew Perry. It was an opinion piece by an actor named Hank Azaria with the title, "To Matthew Perry, God was a bunch of drunks in a room." Now, newly being in the God business, I couldn't help but read it. The author was a longtime friend of Perry, writing in grief about his untimely death. Perry took the author to an AA meeting, which was a daunting experience for the author. The author was overwhelmed by the number of people in the room, and Perry turned to him and said, "Amazing, eh?" Having added the A because, of course, Perry was a good Canadian. "It's something, isn't it? God is a bunch of drunks together in a room." The author goes on to say, "I didn't really know what he meant, but I've since learned. He meant that as bad as we feel, as low as we go, we tend to feel that we are alone in it. Whether our problem is alcoholism, a bad marriage, illness, depression, or strife, we feel like we are the only one that has ever gone through it. We learn that the most unfortunate, terrible things that we face are our greatest strength as they connect us with others. And so all this seemingly pointless suffering has a tremendous point." The author continued, "I learned that I needed the support of those people in the room. I needed their stories. I needed to lean on them. I needed to tell them that I didn't think I could make it through the day without drinking, and hear them say, 'We didn't think so either.'" Perry referred to addiction as the terrible big thing and alcoholism as a bully in the biography that Perry wrote. Cunning, baffling, and powerful, this alcoholism addiction. Too powerful to take on alone, but not when together. God is there. Jesus changed what is meant to be a prophet. No longer was it just old men foretelling the future, having listened to God. Jesus invites all of us to be prophets, to be alert to the reactions of others, as Matthew Perry was with his friend, to understand that we cannot live alone, that among others we can share the pain and share the questions. God was a bunch of drunks in the room, together finding comfort, finding hope. God sends unexpected angels into the room. It's up to us to listen and to discern. Being a prophet is not easy. We must listen to the anguished cries from those in Gaza, to the haunting memories of the Holocaust reverberating in Israel today, to concerns, particularly among the young, about the impact of climate change and questioning whether babies ought to be brought into this world, to the cries of refugees displaced by dictators, by power-hungry people seeking power through orchestrated discrimination. We must hold these tensions, not be overwhelmed by them, but seek to find a path through them, through prayer, through conversation, through the actions and words of Jesus. I have no doubt that Jesus was a prophet, an inspiration, a bearer of good news, teaching us to find hope in hard places and proclaiming a world to follow where opportunities for inspiration and hope abound. Was Matthew Perry a prophet? Are you a prophet? Am I? We are called into the prophetic tradition as Christians, into a life of revolutionary love. We don't speak for God. We are not necessarily divine messengers, but we are humans living in challenging and extraordinary times. We're motivated by love to follow the prophetic path that Jesus laid out for us. We encounter the other. We listen. And then we listen some more. We encounter God's messengers and we further listen. We see a brighter future within others and help them find it within themselves. In the remit conversation after today's service about an autonomous indigenous church, we will encounter and we will listen. We will be slow to judge and quick to open our hearts to hear views different than our own. We will recall that being a prophet means sitting uneasily in these places of tension. We'll respond to the pain in our planet. We'll give preferential treatment to the poor. We'll work for peace, combat racism and injustice. By the grace of God, we will each in our own way together respond to this prophetic call to transform our broken world into a loving community. As prophets, we are called to dig deep and find hope, to share that hope. We see a coherent, loving vision of the world and encourage others to join us. We share God's passion, for we are prophets, following the loving path of Jesus, building upon the great traditions of the Old Testament prophets so carefully laid out before us. May God be with us on our journey. Amen.